Welcome again to the weekly Socialist Telly roundup with myself, Damien Willey, and today I am joined by my wonderful co-host, a good selection of co-hosts today, no less. Steve Walker, Sarah Grant, Bonnie Craven, and Jennifer Forbes. Welcome to you all. How are we?
Hi, everybody.
All right, thank you. Another week's gone by.
It has another
About
week.
as well as we can be, about as well as can be expected in Tory Britain.
It is. And one of the things I wanted to bring up today is the call once again to have schools reopened. We're only 4 weeks after schools were closed to most students, and the conversation has turned to, when are we going to reopen them again? When are we going to start easing restrictions? And potentially we're told now it's going to start from March the 8th. Look at some of the front pages we've seen this week. The Independent has said at one point that the Tories are revolting, and well, they always have been, but in this case, it's because the government wouldn't guarantee schools will reopen before Easter, but now they've said March the 8th, so maybe they're cheered up a little bit. But hang on a moment, because schools have never closed, not for one moment. They've reduced the number of kids they're teaching in schools, and this is something the papers across the board have said over and over again, that the schools must reopen, but they have not fully closed. And in this lockdown, actually, there have been far fewer children sent home because more and more parents are being considered as key workers. So the schools are as much as 60% full. We're not seeing the cases come down as much as we have done in the past, but this has just gone on again and again and again. The Tories have decided that this is going to, they're going to arbitrarily open for March the 8th, and I'm struggling to find the evidence to back this decision up. So forgive me for starting the show with a little bit of a rant, but that's how I'm feeling about this one. It's made me mad. How about you guys?
I'm horrified by it. It's a huge insult to tell parents and communities that children are going to have to go back into school, regardless of the safety concerns of their families and whether or not they're clinically vulnerable, at a time when an average of 1,200 people are dying every day of this virus, and our hospital services are on their knees thanks to the cuts and stripping out by privatisation of all these services in our NHS.
Well, let's not forget to mention that we've passed that 100,000 official total now in terms of people who've been killed by this virus during the UK's pandemic. That's the official total. The ONS has previously suggested that 15% of deaths are being missed in those numbers because of the way the government's counting them. The ONS itself has been spanked this week by the UK Statistics Authority, the head of the relevant department there, for the way that they've presented figures, particularly with regard to schools, that's allowed the government to continue to claim that schools are safe. I think Boris Johnson said this week, schools are safe, they're just good places for the virus to transmit, which is, you wonder what on earth planet are these people living on when they think that's a good idea. And yet we're seeing an absence, still an absence of real opposition from the leadership of the Labour Party, at least. And it's maybe something worth touching on now before we come back to the other stuff later on in the programme. But, we have seen at least one Labour MP this week start to up his game and raise his voice in terms of the way that the party is approaching not just the pandemic, but that as well, and the treatment of the members. But, Labour's approach seems to be, let's agree with the government, but just criticise how they do something or criticise whether they're quick enough to do it. And yet, in a lot of cases, Keir Starmer's pushing harder for the schools to open than the Tories are. And, at the same time, giving conflicting messages about he thinks that nurseries should possibly be closed, but we need a firm plan to get schools open as quickly as possible. Just, we're in a political dystopia at the moment where, not only are we ruled by idiots and well, I don't know what the right word would be, but idiots and people who are being deliberately idiotic. And have nobody else who gets themselves on question PMQs every week, raising their voice and saying anything about really what they're doing and the fact that thousands of people are dying. That could be avoided. And we've seen with New Zealand, whatever kind of version of the virus we've got here, they've had a similar version in Italy for nearly as long, and their numbers have never got as high and they're going down. It can be managed, and the pandemic can be suppressed. But in New Zealand, we've had 25 deaths in total throughout the whole pandemic. So we've had, to what, 10,000 times that much? I can't do the maths in my head, but thousands and thousands of times higher. And we're an island nation like them, and they're just, the media is helping Boris Johnson to cover his backside and claim that he's done everything he can without any real challenge. And you only need to look at some other countries and see that this didn't need to happen. And a huge number of people, a stadium's worth of people that are dead now could have been alive.
I just find it beyond total comprehension how we can have the most ineffective government making dangerous decision after dangerous decision, and we're in a position where we've got a so-called opposition that are doing everything they can to back the government up and force them further down the road of wrong decisions to be made. People's lives are being taken. It doesn't get much more serious than the number of people that we've lost, and we need to see some serious change of direction, I think, from the government, from the opposition, to force the government to make some decisions that looks after the safety predominantly of working class people in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly on this issue of schools being reopened, I completely understand lockdown is hard for everybody. Lots of people are really struggling, some more than others, and lots of people do want to be able to get back to some level of normality. But you know what's harder than lockdown and schools being off? Being ill, or fearing for your life when you go into work, fearing for the lives of your loved ones when you go into work, or the impact that it has on families if you bring that virus home and somebody else in your family gets ill. Like I heard a really tragic story about that on Radio 4, and those families will never recover from that, knowing that they'd managed to isolate and then the virus came home from school. And I have personal experience of that. My daughter was symptomatic with coronavirus just before the last lockdown, and I got ill, and I spent like most of last year really ill with long COVID, and that also is a massive impact that keeps getting overlooked by people making these decisions, like people that aren't counted particularly well. We're not in any kind of like figures to expect to be ill, and it's a massive impact upon society. So every time I hear the Labour Party rushing to push people back into schools, I just think so many people will be impacted. We cannot do it until it's safe. We should be listening to the unions. They're doing really well. The NEU's been fantastic on raising this issue, and it scares me that we aren't listening carefully enough to those concerns. So I think we have to keep supporting those unions and making sure those health and safety concerns, not just for the teachers, but for the wider community, are really listened to.
Absolutely, Jen, well said. I mean, to jump in again, a lot of the newspaper front pages in this last week were talking about how kids want to go back to school. Now, speaking as a parent on my own personal experience, I know that my children have been considerably more happy being at home, free from the stresses and strains, the rush, the panic, the homework, the endless demands on things for them to bring into school. They've been much happier. So in my show in the last week, I had on as a guest an educational psychologist to talk about how to protect our children's mental health during this pandemic, because we are building up a possible mental health crisis across the nation. And the best way we can protect our kids and our parents' and families' mental health is to make sure that people are safe and happy and have the things that they need to get on. Learning can be caught up. You know, people don't stop learning when they leave school. There is lifelong learning. There are always opportunities to learn. And there are different things that you can learn outside of school. And the news this afternoon, there was a story about a family who were dairy farmers, and they were struggling with home education, which, first of all, what's happening at the moment isn't home education, it's distance learning. Home education requires somebody to be able to teach the pupils. In most circumstances, parents are rushed off their feet if they're able to work from home and there's other things going on and so on. We're not talking about home education, we're talking about distance learning by the children, delivered by the qualified teachers and what have you. But these children living on a dairy farm didn't have reliable broadband, so they weren't able to benefit from the distance learning lessons. And the families were really worried about, they're going to fall behind on their English and so on. But then in the next shot, you saw those children helping out on the farm, learning real practical skills, about how that business is run. And that is valuable, that is worthwhile. Chances are those kids one day will end up running that farm when their parents retire or what have you. Let's not diminish other skills outside of, book learning. There's a whole world out there to learn about, and we should be embracing it.
I think if we want to get kids back into any kind of a normal situation, we've got to get to a position where the virus isn't a factor, like New Zealand, like South Korea has done, etc., etc. The Labour Party isn't even calling for a zero COVID strategy officially. But just this week, we've seen, in fact, just today, we've seen a statement come out from the Socialist campaign group of MPs, as a group of backbench MPs in the Labour Party, who are now saying enough's enough. We've got to get a zero COVID strategy. Yes, we've got a mountain to climb that we shouldn't have had to climb, but the only way we're going to get back to any kind of normal life is to eradicate out this virus out of our communities, so the kids can go to school and everybody can get on with the rest of a normal life, regardless what's happening with the vaccines, etc. And out of that because of who's running the party at the minute, all of those MPs are on the backbench, not really in as good a position to get themselves on the TV to talk about it. But we have seen two major interventions this week from one of those guys, John Trickett, and he's spoken out loudly enough that even the BBC is starting to pay a little bit of attention in terms of attacking both Keir Starmer's approach on the non-oppositional approach on the pandemic, but also the way that the leadership has been attacking the members, clamping down on free speech and finding every way that it can to prevent anybody from actually influencing what's going on. So, Trickett for leader, anybody? Is that something that you think is coming up on the horizon?
Well, who knows? Who knows? I mean, John has done a belting job for the last couple of days running, absolutely slamming the Labour leadership. And when you get lines from Starmer coming out with things like, well, no ifs, no buts, no equivocation, we must get kids back to school, hasn't really changed his tune on that. And we want the government to get it right, and we support the government. I mean, it's becoming a drinking game, for heaven's sake. So I'm not surprised that John Trickett has popped up, vocal as he is, as an MP, saying enough is enough. Stop imposing diktat on members and CLPs. Stop talking nonsense to the press. Stop, supporting the government for want of a better word, because you don't seem to be opposing them very much. Stop freezing members from taking part in democratic process. Stop encouraging a salesman type approach to canvassing calls, and stop offering yourself as prizes, because you're not celebrities. I mean, Keir and Ange are raffling themselves off as prizes for phone banking. I mean, what on earth are they thinking? I mean, this doesn't appeal to anybody. It's enough to drive you nuts.
It just shows a complete contempt for a bottom-up type of organisation that the Labour Party needs to be if it's going to win any elections, including the May elections coming up this year. If the diktat is coming from the top, telling the foot soldiers what to do, the foot soldiers, first of all, are going to get very fed up with it. And I know for a fact that lots of people that I know across the country are feeling reluctant to be as active as they otherwise would be. But our voices aren't being heard. I mean, certainly in my own CLP, we pushed for a strategy to resist the return to schools before it's safe. And as far as I know, lots of other activists in the party as well are keen to hold back on the reopening of schools. So when are they going to start listening to what the membership want them to do?
I don't think they are going to at the minute. I don't think they are. I think they're completely happy with the way things are going at the moment. They've obviously, when Jeremy were in charge, he was trying to change the party to a bottom up organisation, with the membership dictating in what direction the party goes and things. And it's frightening how quickly they've actually changed it round, to be quite honest. I mean, we've gone from a membership that's empowered and confident in what they're saying and willing to, wanting to have those in-depth conversations to get votes to people. And that's what we're encouraged to do. We're encouraged to educate ourselves and, read the manifesto, know it in and out, so you can have those conversations on the doorstep and on the phone, to actually get those votes and actually try and change people's minds, to vote Labour. And all we're back to now is, it's the kind of things that call centres have that unions absolutely hate, by the way. It's this like league table thing that Damo were on about earlier, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Can you imagine if Corbyn had offered himself up as a prize for doing the most canvassing and things? He would have been absolutely. It would have lasted for weeks. The outroar, the outcry over it. So I do like what John Trickett's been coming out with this week. But I will say that I always come back to Lavery for leader. So I'm just wondering if he's acting like a bit of a stalking whore for Lavery.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, I've no idea about that, but I was really pleased to see, John come out and say these things, because it's the first time I've felt in ages that anybody's really kind of grasped the situation that we're in. Like, we are in absolutely momentous times where we need really big responses to overcome these challenges: the climate crisis, the economic crisis that we're going to suffer the fallout from, getting working people back in meaningful employment through all of these crises, as well as the corona crisis. We don't even have a zero COVID response, and all of those things would be best solved by bringing in the best people together, which we have in the Labour Party. And instead of that, we've had this top-down authoritarian response to demoralise people. And John's ideas are really recognising the strengths of the Labour Party over the last few years under Corbyn and building on that. And that's what we needed. That's what I wanted to see under Starmer. It's recognising there were lots of positives. Of course, we've got big challenges to overcome, but building on the past rather than destroying it would have been a better way forward. And recognising that we need to bring people in and work more collaboratively across the party would be much better. So for me, it just made my heart sing. I thought, come on, we need somebody to start leading a bit more of a fight back and say, this isn't working. It's clearly not working when we've lagged behind in the polls consistently for so long, and we know so many people that are demoralised. So I was really glad that he said that, and I hope we're going to see more of that from more Labour MPs, because there's a lot of strength and talent in that PLP that are quite quiet at the moment, that it would be great to hear more from them. Who knows if it's a stalking horse, Sarah, but I don't know who that would be, but it would be, it would be interesting. We need to hear more from some socialist voices in the party, that's for sure.
Well, I think it's very clear that something's going on. There are moves on the left, but it's very obvious from the noises coming out from inside the party that the right are also preparing their own move on Starmer. I think he's in for a spanking at the local elections, assuming that they take place. He's already getting his damage limitation in early in the by getting his friends in the so-called liberal press to trail that it's going to be really bad and talk about hundreds of seats that he could lose. And I'm sure it's on the basis that if he manages to not lose hundreds and only loses a smaller amount or stand still, that they'll claim it's a victory. But the right are not happy with his performance. The right are not happy with his polling. Boris Johnson keeps getting further ahead of him, and then he'll claw a bit back and then drop back again. And and now they're starting to make noises about needing to go more, win more Tory voters instead of winning the kind of third of people that didn't bother voting in the last election, and win back some of the Corbyn supporters, because there's only about out of people that voted in the last election, the latest polling suggests that 1 out of 3 isn't going to bother voting for Labour in the next one, or possibly voting at all. So nothing's looking good, and even the right wingers are lining up various potential candidates, of whom Rebecca Cooper seems to get mentioned a lot, as their preferred replacement for Keir Starmer. In which case, obviously, if they try to remove him, then there's an opportunity there for the left to go, to put up somebody of a genuine pedigree. And if we've kept enough members in the party or can get them back in, then obviously that's a big opportunity. But we have to be ready for that. But whatever seems to happen, I think Keir Starmer's sitting very ill at ease in his chair at the minute, and glancing around him on both sides, wondering whether the attack's going to come from the left or the right, but not feeling very secure in his seat.
I just hope we're not reading too much into this. I mean, is it this first sniff of somebody voicing some actual opposition to? Are we clinging on to something for dear life? Because finally, some opposition. Thank you, John. But Corbyn being offered up as a prize, it did make me laugh. It probably worked, to be honest. Somebody will probably go for it. But I mean, when it comes to Starmer, you look from John Trickett now and what he's been saying. You look across to Keir Starmer, and your heart just sinks. I mean, the best he could come out with, and anything resembling closely a policy decision this week, was to offer to protect the 48-hour maximum working week. I was like, oh my good God, we were fighting for a 32-hour week not long ago, for heaven's sake. It is just weak. And I do agree with you, Steve. I think May is going to be absolutely visceral for Labour. I think it is going to be a massive condemnation of Starmer. The polling from Ipsos Mori has been absolutely dire for Starmer personally, and for Labour generally, actually. It's looking set to lose mayoral contests, losing council seats. all on top of the finances that apparently the party is losing as well because of the continued drift away from the party of members, or members cancelling the subscriptions, which is the quiet way of leaving. And of course, the party has got no idea how much they're going to lose ultimately that way. And for a guy who set himself up as the unity candidate, the only person he's united with, frankly, has been Boris Johnson and the Tories.
I think that's sorry, Jen.
Sorry, Bonnie. I was just going to say, isn't it mad though? We've had Labour Party members suspended for showing solidarity rather with Jeremy Corbyn. But this week, Keir Starmer showed solidarity with Boris Johnson for breaking lockdown. Like, how can that possibly be the case? How can you have that in a party? Sorry, Bonnie, you carry on.
No, I was going to say, trouble with sitting on a fence is you're likely to irritate both of your neighbours. And he has unified the party. He's unified all around him. In the view that he is not offering any form of opposition from the government. So, not the kind of unity I think he had in mind. And I haven't seen any attempts to secure any unity either. I mean, we're looking at in the face of the worst government I've certainly ever known. I mean, even worse than what Thatcher did to us, the daylight robbery of our public services, the response to the health crisis, the pandemic, the crisis in education, the crisis in health, the crisis in jobs, and so on. All of these things going on. If we can't make any inroads in that scenario, we've got to really ask some serious questions.
Yeah, definitely.
It's very ironic how we used to always have the, when Corbyn was in charge, we'd see the right of the party always saying, Labour's, the left's more interested in consolidating its power internally than it is in actually fighting the Tories. And yet we're seeing exactly that. I mean, you Jen, and Damo will be in the best position to talk about this, I guess. But in the Southwest, we've just seen the Labour hierarchy in the Southwest cancel a lot of candidate selections after the votes had already been cast by the members, presumably because they didn't like the results that were coming out. And people who were lined up to stand in the local elections there, suddenly finding out that they're not, and the party's going to appoint people instead. What else can you tell us in terms of how all that's been done and how the members are taking to it?
Well, so that actually, the votes to select those candidates happened quite a long time ago. And they are people that are suspended but haven't had hearings yet for things like hearing a motion of solidarity for Jeremy Corbyn. So it's quite dubious, to be suspended for that long on those kind of grounds for something that really should be normal party business, isn't it? So Darren, the guy I know quite well, he's a very capable socialist, to be an excellent candidate for his local area, an excellent councillor for his local area. He wasn't actually informed that he's no longer the councillor. They've just started the proceedings to select someone else. So at the very least, we aren't even operating respectfully. You would expect that. If we were even contemplating that, you would rush forward the hearing and you would make sure that was dealt with properly before you move on to the next stage, and at least keep people informed of that process. So I just think if we want to project to the country that we are decent, honourable people that are trustworthy for you to cast your vote to, then we need to conduct ourselves better internally than we are. It's simply not acceptable to treat our own members in this way. It's not sending out a good message to anybody. And it's also completely demoralising for all of the members around that understand what's happening and are really concerned and they want to play a part in making the world a better place, and instead they're being pushed out.
I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, really. Jen is far more well connected with these hierarchies than I am, but I can attest just how awful Southwest Regional really is. I mean, I was going to stand as a council candidate, and obviously with COVID and all the rest of it that's been going on, this has been a really long protracted process. But you end up with a leader who's taken the party in a direction that you don't believe in. You want to support the Labour Party, but you want to support what you believe the Labour Party stands for, which is solidarity and collectivism and helping to make things better for the working class. And when you've got a guy that's essentially supporting the Tories all the time, you don't feel you can support that, then as I did, you step down. And they've got a real problem in the Southwest actually to get candidates to stand now. It's pretty dire down here, but
that seems to be across.
I'm completely comfortable where I am in not having having stepped down, because you've got to you can't stand for a party that you don't believe in the direction they're going in, essentially.
And yet it doesn't even seem to be limited to the left. The general disillusionment and lack of enthusiasm for anybody to put themselves through the rigmarole, through the ringer to get into a seat seems to be, certainly in my experience, an all-time low. And even the right wingers that you might expect would be jumping up and saying, "I'm going to grab this." Now the left's, not standing for it. And it's around the country. So I mean, Sarah, you're in Rotherham, and I hear that in the Rotherham and Sheffield areas, the situation is pretty much similar.
Yeah, I'm hearing the similar things. Exactly what Jennifer. We're having trouble. Getting candidates to stand. I'm a bit worried about the locals. I think particularly in places like Rother Valley and things like that, I'd be very worried about Tories taking Labour places in Rotherham. And if they got a candidate in every ward, every ward, I think Labour Rotherham would be in real trouble, to be quite honest. But hopefully not. But yeah, it doesn't look as though they've got that many candidates. I think they're kind of targeting more Rother Valley kind of area, because that's where they've got the Tory MP. But yeah, I think we would be in bother if there's stood enough candidates. Definitely.
A bit further north and east, in the Tees Valley area, again, there's noises that the Tories might manage to win the mayoral election there and make inroads into councils. Bolsover, Dennis Skinner's old patch, which used to be as Labour as could be. Similar noises coming from there. How bad must Labour be at the minute that a Tory party that is killing tens of thousands of our people by the measures that they're taking or not taking, are threatening to take ground from the Labour Party in its strongholds in the middle of a national disaster that the Tories are worsening all the time, even with a dishonest media, which is a given. How far has Labour fallen that we can't even defend our own patch and get votes from the people that are directly suffering as a result of Tory policies?
It's an indictment of the direction the party has taken. Ultimately, we've got a Labour leader now who has spent more time supporting this government, as awful as it is, than opposing it. I mean, we saw Johnson on TV the other day, and after we passed that 100,000 death toll, and he was there and he was bowed head and he was, contrite, but it was a performance. I mean, the video speech that he gave on the 3rd of February last year has been widely shared across social media, where he made the case for taking advantage of this COVID crisis to make money for Britain. He saw it as an economic opportunity. And when you put that, which is before the virus actually hit this country, in light of everything that he's done afterwards, it does make you wonder that actually, was that not what his thinking was all the time when he went on the This Morning programme and expressed his desire to let the virus sweep through the population, and it's just completely blown up in his face. It's completely backfired because he didn't actually take dealing with this virus seriously. And we have had a Labour leader who has gone along with that, essentially, who has said, we want them to get it right. We want to support the government. And this has been the end result. The government has not been challenged, has not been taken to task about the mistakes it has made, which have cost so many lives, the worst response to this COVID crisis on the planet. And the opposition has been nowhere to be seen. And when the opposition has just, as has been said already today, is just essentially gone along or offered slight tweaks, or, well, we're not going to be quite as bad as the Tories, people are not going to be inspired by that. Not anymore. Not after what we once could have had. People want a Labour Party that's actually going to challenge and oppose and offer something substantially different and offer hope. And at the moment, there is no hope. And so people think, why bother?
I actually find it quite scary as well, because when you look at like the report that came out this week that showed that up to 26,000 deaths could have been saved from the first lockdown if we'd locked down like 2 weeks earlier, because it really rises that rapidly the longer you delay it. So if we'd had calls for an inquiry in the summer when we'd got it under control and we'd learnt the lessons from the early mistakes, they wouldn't have been repeated again. And then, I mean, we didn't just not learn the lessons. When Labour councils were trying to close schools, the Labour Party was joining in with the calls to take legal action against them. That delay in lockdown has again more than likely doubled the impact on deaths in this wave of the crisis. I mean, that's absolutely terrifying. We must, as an absolute minimum, be saying right now, we need an inquiry to stop any more mistakes happening again, because we know for a fact they will. There is absolutely no way that a leader as incompetent as Boris Johnson is going to get it right when he's failed every single step of the way up till now. And we are failing by not calling for him to go. We need that inquiry. We need him gone. And we need the country to be run by people that would actually like our citizens to survive as a minimum. You know, that should be a minimum from a PM. And we've got to do that right now. It's got to be the call from everybody. Boris has got to go and we need an inquiry.
Right with you there, Jen.
Well,
I mean, the thing
Andy,
is, though, he has failed as far as you and I are concerned, insofar as we've got the worst death rate, I think, in amongst the developed countries. We've also had a massive hit on our economy. So he's failed with regards to health, well-being and the economy. But some people have done very well out of this. I mean, you look at the billions of pounds of contracts that have gone out to people who have links with the Tory government, with, money going for useless track and trace apps that never worked and all of that. We're talking about millions or billions and billions of pounds going, and people's lives have been taken as a result of their ineptitude. But some of their friends have done very well. Thank you very much.
Well, what was that stat somebody put out during the week? It was, because Johnson was right. It certainly was a money-making opportunity, just not for most of us, but the handful of billionaires that have increased their wealth by trillions since the pandemic started. And yet, I mean, even if you just take the case of the track and trace thing, somebody said, if I remember it right, it was, if you spent £100 a second or something for the next 3,000 years, you wouldn't make as much money. You wouldn't have as much money as those people have earned for doing a track and trace system that didn't work. And yet this week we have seen a mass movement of a sort actually manage to strike a blow back and cause a billionaire to lose money rather than just the ordinary people. Who's been abreast of this?
I love this.
Go on, Deborah. You sound as though you're on top of that. Tell us what's been going on.
I'll try and go through it to see if I understood it myself fully how it works, because these hedge funds are mysterious things. But this is a story essentially of how a group of people on Reddit have actually driven a hedge fund to bankruptcy and are looking to bankrupt others by playing them at their own game. And it comes down to this business of what they call short selling, which is to borrow a share valued at a given price, sell it, then buy it back at a lower price. And that's what they call shorting. And they then give this share back to whoever they borrowed one off to start with and pocket the difference. And this is how they make the money. It's sort of a get-rich scheme that the wealthy hedge funds love, though they, of course, borrow hundreds of thousands of shares at a time. But it can backfire. And if that borrowed share they sold goes up in value, then they cannot then buy it back cheaper. They still have to return that borrowed share eventually and are forced to buy it back at a loss to themselves, and they lose money that way. And what Reddit users have essentially done is scale this up by getting together and buying a few shares each in this company called GameStop that's come into the news, and they keep the risk, or they're actually prepared to make a loss, essentially minimal to themselves as individuals, but by buying the same shares in the same company, they drive the price of those shares up to such an extent that any hedge fund who has borrowed and sold in the hope to short these shares and make a killing on it will find themselves unable to buy them back cheaper. And in fact, they're getting more and more expensive. In GameStop, I think they surged by over 700%. And if they bought enough of them, as has happened to one hedge fund, then the total value of the hedge fund is, what they owe exceeds what the hedge fund ends up worth. And they're bankrupt. You're getting a billionaire who tend to run these hedge funds, and they're bankrupted. And the Reddit users doing this, they're going to lose money themselves, but they don't care. But this is the brilliant part about it. This is about giving the rich a bloody nose. And perhaps
I think
the country need to, take notice of this, of how much actually ordinary people hate them right now.
The establishment media have lost no time in decrying this move as a manipulation of the market, as though that's an unusual thing. And yet, the mere act of a company with billions deciding to buy huge numbers of shares on a short, as they call it, will drive down the price of shares, because people assume there must be something about that company that makes those investors think the values are going to go down, and that's why they're performing this maneuver. So they're manipulating the market and making billions out of that normally. In this case, a bunch of ordinary people working collectively, and I think that's the key thing, working collectively, were able to make the shares go in the opposite direction and bankrupt these exploitative people, and force them to, pay the piper, really, on a rigged gamble that they've been making for decades and making billions. But it hasn't taken very long for the establishment to hit back and try to make sure that ordinary people can't act this way to make money at the expense of the rich anymore. So it went out, a couple of tweets from people, and one guy who used to be the Secretary of State in America, Robert Reich, and he said, if Redditors rallying GameStop is an acceptable market manipulation, what would you call it when greedy Wall Street bankers gambled away our entire economy in 2008 and faced no consequences? But in the response to that, the Robinhood, one of the share trading platforms, as I understand it, in the US, has suspended the sales of the stocks involved in these fightbacks on short selling. It says, so they've suspended this because regular people were making too much money, proving that once again, any time that the poors, as you put it, find a way to get any sort of financial foothold in the world, the billionaire class will move quickly to crush them. So it's a salutary lesson in some ways that the establishment has no intention of allowing people to use the rules of the system to benefit themselves at the expense of the elite. On the other hand, that shows that we've got to be prepared for a fight, and it's not going to be easy. But it does show, when people, a bunch of people chatting on Reddit about one of their favorite gaming platforms or whatever it was, and the move that was happening on that in the stock market, were able not just to defend that, but to bankrupt the people that were trying to profit from it. So, if people work together, it shows what can be done. If enough of us stand, the whole thing about we are many and they are few really kicks in and makes it much harder for the powers that be to continue to exercise those powers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a heartwarming story, isn't it? And at the same time, this week we've seen some really quite shocking statistics come out from Greenpeace, and we've measured the widening inequality that's happened through the crisis, with figures like Jeff Bezos could give all of his employees $100,000, all of his employees, and he would still have more money than he had at the start of the crisis. And then we've got the Labour Party stepping back from things like wealth taxes. So when you look at what those Reddit people have done, you think we as Labour Party members can surely convince our party to take quite small steps really to try to tackle some of this inequality by things like a wealth tax. Really shouldn't be beyond our dream, should it? We need to go much, much more radical, really. So I think we need to try and get a bit of perspective back in our campaigning, don't we? And actually the perspective is to aim much, much higher. Stop going so low, and let's try and get some of that change happening now, because we can win it. I mean, we've got that, Marcus Rashford has also shown us that we can join our voices together and make change, can't we? So we've got to keep pushing the Labour Party to do better, because we can. Boris Johnson's all over the place anyway. If we unite our voices, we can beat him now as well.
Well, sadly, Marcus Rashford's not a Labour MP, so he's not eligible to be leader of the party. But he's certainly been functioning as the main opposition for quite a while.
So we have seen some really good work from our trade unions as well on the point of collectivism. So obviously we've had, British Gas is still out on strike again today against the fire and rehire, and lots of these companies that are listed on the stock exchange are exploiting the crisis, in my opinion, with their various fire and rehire schemes, are ways to cut down their staffing costs whilst people are worried about even having a job in the first place. I have to really pay massive tribute to the people at Unite who won the campaign against fire and rehire at British Airways cargo department. So that was a big win as well, which again shows if we get our act together and work in a collective way, we can secure some wins for people.
No, definitely. Going back to what Jenny just said, for me, Labour Party with regards to trade union members at the minute and workers' rights, there's no vision, or there's no, radicalism or anything like that. We were asking for, people were demonstrating for a 30-hour working week 100 years ago. And now we've got, obviously, nobody's surprised that the Tories are going to try and rip up our, rights after we've been, after coming out of EU. If anyone that's surprised at that, you know, I mean, the Tories would have us all in work hours if they could get away with it. But the fact that Labour are saying, oh yeah, we want you to still have a 48-hour working week, rest breaks, and what is it, overtime? And it's like, is that what we're fighting for now? A 48-hour working week? I mean, anybody that fights for a 48-hour working week has never done a 48-hour working week, to be quite honest. Anybody that thinks that's all right, they're not on this planet and they've never done it, you know, working in a care home or on a hospital ward or something for 48 hours. It's absolutely, that kind of working, it'll kill somebody off.
Exactly.
I mean, like with the fire and rehire, I mean, Labour's now come out and said they want to outlaw it. But it's just have a word with Tower Hamlets Council, because they're Labour Council, because Labour Councils indulge in that practice. So they ought to get we ought to get our own house in order first and have a word with our own councils before we dictate what other people do. You know, lead by example.
Yeah.
But the 48-hour working week, it's just not good enough. It's not good enough. I mean, we've gone from under Corbyn, you know, 30-hour working week to a 48-hour. And I mean, the thing that what this pandemic's shown is just not only the massive just general inequality in the country with regards to obviously the education, working at home has blown up, and the massive inequalities in this country, but also the workplace inequalities. You know, you've still, what the government's done for workers is just not being good enough. I mean, you've got people that have, you know, that are infected that have to go into work because they've got to work and they've got no choice but not to work, and the government is totally not looking after the workers of this country in this pandemic in any way, shape or form. No. I mean, obviously we take strength from what the unions are doing. Obviously the win at Rolls-Royce as well, that was a good win for Unite as well. So I think the trade union movement is doing a really, really good job, and the Labour Party needs to get itself in gear, basically. There's a lot, I mean, there's been a lot about you know, leaving the EU, and the EU was this massive bastion of workers' rights and things like that, and it wasn't at all. It's a capitalist, you know, grouping of countries. The EU isn't bothered about workers' rights in any way. I mean, the only reason why you know, equality pay legislation was in the EU, it's because the French workers had it before the EU was formed, and they demanded that it was included. So the EU doesn't give a flying about workers' wages, and all like social equality legislation that was fought for by the workers in Britain. It wasn't given us by the powers that be in the EU because they care so much about us. That was fought for and won by the workers. And anybody that goes on about the EU being giving us all these rights and that it's absolutely amazing, they're totally downplaying the struggle of British workers over years and decades, fought for rights that is up to us to keep and fight for. It's not up to the EU to give us, it's not up to the government to give us, because the Tories will take it off us eventually if we don't fight for it. It's up to us to fight for it like they have done in the past.
Yeah, it's a fantastic result for workers at BA, and as you say, led by Unite and Socialist Telly's own Howard Beckett. He's going to have to interview himself on Strike TV this week, isn't he? Let's be honest. But it was, you know, they did the, you know, things. Strike action is not something that is the go-to response for the unions, and a lot of people, and often in the media, it's portrayed that, you know, this is all the unions are there for. You know, strike action is the last resort. Of course, it causes huge disruption, and it did cause huge disruption as BA Cargo went on strike over, you know, Christmas and New Year. But you know what they've achieved, they've got rid of fire and rehire is out for good. Workers are back on their previous better contracts, pay rises, and those dismissed for refusing to sign the new contracts are getting their jobs back. There's no better example of what being in a trade union can achieve. And the collectivism and solidarity promoted within that trade union movement and everything exemplified by those workers is exactly what Labour should be exemplifying, because Labour is supposed to be the political arm of the trade union movement, and they're not acting anything like it. So please take inspiration from the trade unions, and please join one if you're not already in one. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add on that point, really.
Absolutely. I think, you know, let's go back and look quickly then at some of the, you know, kind of statistical stuff that's been going on this week, without wanting to bore people to tears. But it's actually not very boring. We've had the UK statistics departmental head for the relevant section telling off the Office for National Statistics for the way that it's presented its information and allowed the government to continue to claim schools and other places were safe when they weren't. We had the ONS again then this week coming out and saying that there was no particular indication in the numbers that teachers and other school staff were any more in danger from the virus than anybody else. And they had to be corrected by the Times Educational Supplement, pointing out that, for example, adult male teachers in the secondary school are 2.5 times more likely to die from the virus than the general population. Now, we've had some of the, some of the statistics showing that other types of school workers, the teaching assistants and so on, they have to get very hands-on with the helping the kids doing their lessons. Those guys have been suffering, I think it was 7 or 8, I think 7 times more rate of infection than the general population. And yet we've had an official statistical body of the government claiming that the risks were broadly equal to what the rest of us face. And the government then, of course, using that to justify its policies. I'm sure it's already decided what it was going to do, but justify their policies and claim that, that it was safe to go ahead and do it. And the media, doing the media's job and picking on the bits of the statistics that help the government cover its backside and avoid the blame for its behaviour. But when we've had a situation where we've had 100,000 deaths, and Italy's New Zealand's the extreme case with just 25, but Italy's had the new variant of the virus for very nearly as long as the UK has, and their death rate last week was, I think, about 400 compared to us getting up to 1,700 on a day, and on a downward trajectory far before ours, because they acted early and they acted, decisively when they did it and didn't dither. They just got on with it, and the difference between them and us has been the decisions that the government has made in those countries, not the infectiousness of the virus, etc. Because even with the apparently more infectious version of the virus, other countries are managing to keep on top of their the growth in their pandemic and drive it down, where the UK has just seen horrific death rates, and the government seems to be relying on the media to get us to a point where we all hear a total like 1,825 or whatever it was this week, and just take it as background noise because we're not as horrified as we were at the beginning of the pandemic when 10 died.
Yeah, absolutely. That statistical mismanagement is absolutely terrifying, the way that we're misleading the public. And then that obviously stops people making the right decisions and holding the government to account as they should. And the press is so complicit in that. I've been really frustrated listening to them constantly try to focus on the statistical likelihood of a child being very ill from coronavirus or from a child having tested positive as an indicator of the fact that it's safe for the entire country for schools to be open, because those facts aren't related, are they? We're talking about transmission through children. Children may well be asymptomatic, but they are still just as likely to contract it from one another as adult humans are. They're just human beings, but they mix in close quarters. So, it's absolutely appalling, because then it's misleading some people into thinking that it was safe for them to send their children in when they also, might be more at risk. And then that mismanagement and the way they are talking about human life as though it has less value because somebody has an underlying health condition, which can mean such a variety of things, but it never means a person has no value. And I feel really insulted every time I hear them say that, because I think about the people you are talking about. They are people's loved ones. They are valuable members of society, and we shouldn't be dismissing somebody as irrelevant because they might have had asthma, or even if they are disabled, their life might not look the same as ours, but it is valuable to them and to their loved ones. And I just think that is not something that we should be taking into account as though, and we heard people do that, didn't we, in quite vulgar ways this week, talking about people as though they aren't of value. So I think that that's another area where I'm really frustrated with our mainstream media for not holding the government account, because they are complicit in what they are doing by not doing their job properly.
We had a peer, I think it was, wasn't it, on the TV telling a woman with cancer that her life was less valuable than somebody else's. And that just, that goes to show the kind of mentality that's behind this. We're pretty much back to the kind of, the eugenics that was popular in the 20s and 30s of the last century, that, if you were ill or you were disabled or you were mentally impaired or whatever else that made you less than you know, their idealized version of what a person should be, that you were, you know, you were less worthy. And sadly, that's where, you know, that's where our government and media seem to be allowing us to either to drift or actively pushing us along in that direction.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we even had supposedly friendly Daily Mirror putting stories out about how children have got to go back to school. It's in their well-being, you know, in their interest for their well-being and so on and so forth, and not challenging, taking at face value the idea, as you were talking about, Steve, that schools are no more dangerous than other places. Well, they may not be as buildings as they're, you know, as they stand, but if everybody in that building is there without a mask on, without a face covering, a visor or what have you, or PPE, of course it's more dangerous than riding on the tube or on the bus or the train, or however people are going to get to work for a limited period of time, because those kids are sat in a small classroom with effectively 30 or more other households, any one of whom could have been exposed to that virus, and they're going to be taking it out to the rest of their community. You know, I mean, the facts don't lie. You look at the way the numbers soared after schools went back last September. There was a slight dip in the numbers a couple of weeks after half term, then they went back up through the roof again. Now they've come down a little bit, but that reduction in numbers is also evidence of the fact that the current so-called lockdown we have at the moment is far less stringent than the first one we had. You know, lockdowns slow down the transmission of the disease. We need a proper lockdown where only those who absolutely must be in schools are in schools, and everyone else is facilitated to be at home, maybe with some free broadband or something. Wouldn't that be radical?
Oh yes, the free broadband, brilliant.
What an absolutely communist and terrible idea.
Oh, I read a SAGE report, and it said that in households where there's a school-age child, in most cases, especially when it's a 12 to 16-year-old, they're most likely, nearly in every case, they're the first case within the household, and then it's spread in the household. And apparently 12 to 16-year-olds are twice as likely to pass on the infection than over 17s, and they're still fixated with this going back to school. And I tell you, I mean, they're using the children's mental health, and I tell you what's harming the mental health more than anything else. It's this stop start. You go back to school, then it's taken away from you. They should have just done, like it's been mentioned before, zero COVID. Just get it done, because this stop start, it's for kids, it's absolutely horrific for them. I feel so sorry for them. It really is affecting them, and it's affecting my kids this time. Definitely, I'm definitely seeing from the first lockdown. They really are struggling with this being out. I mean, my kids do want to go back to school, but they're at home, and you know we're coping as best we can, as you know, as most people are. But they really are struggling, and I blame the government for it, because it's this stop start all the time, and it's just messing with their heads. And I don't know. I do feel sorry for kids, to be honest.
No,
stop start, and the fear that they're going to be the ones that bring the virus on and kill off their grandparents or something, you know. All of that weighs on kids' minds very heavily, especially kids who are given to a bit more deep thinking and stuff like that. So, you know, that's the situation. I mean, we're running to the end of our hour now, but you know, I think the few messages out of this are pretty plain. I mean, Boris Johnson should be on trial. For God's sake, somebody make a challenge in the Labour Party and save us from this kind of death by 1,000 cuts that's happening at the moment, of just just the slicing us open and draining out any kind of life and hope and vision from what was not very long a very great party. And but everybody, whether you're in the Labour Party, out of the Labour Party, act together, show solidarity, decide what you want, and make sure you're working with other people to get it. And the sky can be the limit, and even the powerful and billionaires can be brought low if people work together in a concerted enough fashion. And I think last note we'll say as we round up, as Dame, I think it was said at the beginning of the program, if you're not in a union, join one. That's the key thing at the minute. We need the unions as strong as possible and as bolshy and militant as possible to refuse to take the crap that's being thrown at people and to refuse to allow the government, as they certainly will, to put the cost of all this on our backs while the billionaires are making a lot of money out of it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Join us again next week when we'll be rounding up on whatever shit show's been happening then. Take care.